Good morning, friends. Good morning, Lou.
Good morning. How are we doing today?
Good. Back again to our Christmas decorations, last vestiges before we take
That's
them
right.
down. I'm enjoying it. I really like it. I'm thinking of keeping it like this for the whole year.
All right.
I love that reindeer and everything. Anyway, today we're going to be talking about episode 109, chapter 12, verses 5, 6, and 7. It's a short episode. Bear with me, but it sets the tone for the next few verses.
hmm
Essentially, it's going to tell you what you need to do to get to the point where you can think of the unmanifest, God without a form, how you get to that point. And if you can't get there, how to come down to the next lower level, coming down a ladder. If you can't get to the top, you come down one ladder, one rung, and you come down one rung if you can't do that, and you keep coming down until you can do what you can.
Yep.
That applies to all of us. So, verse 5 says, greater is the difficulty of those people whose minds are set on the unmanifest, greater than with a form, obviously.
hmm
To think of something that doesn't exist with no
Right.
form is difficult. For the goal, the unmanifest, is hard for the embodied to reach, meaning those embodied, meaning those who focus on or identify with their own body, the embodied. Those people, they're so focused on themselves, on their body, their mind, their
Right.
intellect, they find it very hard to think of God in its unmanifest form and need a form. That's all it really is. That is more difficult to do that. That's verse
Well,
5.
in episode 107, what occurred to me was that we as human beings are so dependent on our five senses. That's how we take in all our stimulus, and that's how we process things. That's how we think. But Brahman doesn't engage any of the five senses, so we have to find a whole new way of grasping concepts. Which takes some time. Is difficult. I think we should cut ourselves some slack and understand that it's a path to figuring that out. Don't you think?
You know, you bring up a very fascinating new subject that's coming up very much so and is in vogue in today's day and age, which is consciousness.
Yeah.
So the thought, just bear with me, friends, as I've said in previous episodes, Lou and I don't rehearse this. We don't know I have no idea what Lou's going to bring up. Lou has no idea what I'm going to be talking about. So we just shoot from the hip as this comes along, but it often leads to some very interesting thoughts for me. So consciousness is something that is really being talked about very much so. And to my knowledge, which is limited, but to my knowledge, consciousness really looks like, sounds like part of this Brahman, God.
Yes. Yes.
And consciousness, if you look at these old ancient rishis, munis, sages, the people who left the world and went up into the Himalayas and sat in perfect stillness for years without eating, drinking, how they did it, nobody knows. But at that time, they came out with these brilliant scriptures and things, and they came out with brilliant mathematics, astronomy, speed of light, the distance between planets. How did they know that? Now, in today's day and age, with all these magnificent computers and everything else, we're just learning some of these things that these sages came out with themselves. And sorry, Lou, I went off on a tangent.
No, I'm enjoying it. So keep going.
But what this theory of consciousness, it really says, is that consciousness, our consciousness, really can go anywhere. We've seen that in dreams, and when we're just daydreaming, thinking about different things, our mind can go anywhere where the body can't go and the mind can't go. However, what happens is, because of our limitation of our five senses, our own inner Brahman can only go as far as the sense organs allow us to go. Were it not for the senses, so the example that's given is a person who's blind and deaf and mute and has no sense organs on his skin.
Mhm.
We would think that we'd go crazy. But the other way of looking at it is that the consciousness then is free and it's limitless in where it can go and what it can do.
Right.
And it's complicated, very hard to understand, this theory of consciousness, but it raises the exact same question that Lou just raised, which is that Brahman cannot be perceived by our senses, because Brahman, to some extent, is our senses.
And
So,
meditation in this journey towards Brahman is the process of being able to let go of our stimulus from our senses.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, meditation is being able to not focus your mind on what it wants to, which is things that happened yesterday, things that happened today, things that you're thinking about in the future, that I'm hungry, that I'm thirsty, that it's hot, that it's cold, blocking out all of that to just let ourselves become one with our inner self,
Right. So
with a
people who are
capital S.
moving from a form god, a Ganesh, to a formless god and understanding the concept of Brahman, I think give yourself a little time. It's going to take some time to understand these concepts because
Right.
it's so foreign to our normal method of thinking.
Yes, yes. Please give yourself some time. Don't be hard on yourself. This is not an easy thing to understand. But I promise you, each time you listen to this,
Yeah.
it becomes a little clearer, little clearer. Ultimately, you say, wow, I've heard this many times before, but it's starting to sink in now.
Yes.
So, verse 6 to 12 are progressive steps towards self-realization. And it says, if you get there, fine. If you don't, come back one step. So, verse 6 and 7 show us that the physical, mental, and intellectual. So, physical often refers to the body, mental refers to the mind, intellectual means the intellect, disciplines that you need to prepare oneself for meditation. So each one of us has a body, we have a mind, we have an intellect. We have to work with all three to prepare ourselves for meditation, because meditation is the way to get to self-realization. These exercises, which we'll talk about in verse 6 and 7, help a person to drop or reduce his vasanas, his desires, because that's really what's preventing you from meditating, to then become detached from the world affairs, free yourself from the stresses and strains and temptations of the world, of everyday life, and renunciation of desires, world affairs, stress and strain, which then qualifies you for meditation. So what does verse 6 and 7 say? Verse 6 says, but those who worship me, worship of God, renouncing all actions in me, meaning you do the action, but you renounce your ownership of that action. You don't want to say, well, I'm doing this because it's me and I should get the nothing to do with you. Renounce your action in God, in Brahman, regarding me as supreme, meaning whatever it is, it happens because of Brahman, not me. Meditating on me, thinking only of God, with single pointed yoga, single pointed dedication to becoming united with God. And verse 7 continues, for those whose minds are set on me, nothing else, you're not thinking about anything else, constantly thinking of Brahman, I become before long the deliverer from the ocean of death bound sansar. Death bound is an interesting concept that he talks about here. It means that everything in this sansar, in this world, universe, is ultimately headed for death, except Brahman. Death meaning end and change. We talked about that in the last episode. We'll do that again now. So, verse 6 and 7 shows us the progressive steps towards self realization. Worshipping God, renouncing all actions in God, regarding God as supreme and mighty, meditating on God, single pointed yoga, mind set on me, then you become self realized. Verse 8 is the subtlest sadhana, or the spiritual discipline, which is meditation. Verse 8 talks of how to meditate, what to do, etc. Verse 9 and 10, these verses say if you can't do 8, you can't do meditation, you can't even, then come down one step if you're unable to meditate. That's in 8 and 9. Sorry, 9 and 10. Verse 8 is the spiritual discipline to meditate. And 11 is the most basic of all spiritual disciplines to follow. If you can't do meditate, you can't do a step below, can't do a step below that, then this is the most basic, which is in verse 11. So the steps that are enumerated are, number one, a bhogi. A bhogi is an indulger. An indulger, a person who just says, listen, I just want to indulge myself in all the pleasures that life has to offer.
Mm-hmm.
He is focused on enjoying the world. Sorry, excuse me. Bhogi is somebody who is just focused on saying, I want to enjoy and just wallow in pleasure. Then comes yogi. Now, each one of us has a body, a mind, and an intellect. And each one of us is a combination of all those three: body, mind, and intellect.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us are more focused on body, less on mind, less on intellect. Some of us are more focused on mind, less on the other two. And what the scriptures give us is a way of using whatever we are most involved in, body, mind, or intellect, to reach the Brahman. So if it was body that you're focused on, when you realize that there's more to it than just being bhogi or enjoyment, then you do karma yoga. If you're body focused, then you do karma yoga. And if you are a mind oriented person, you do bhakti yoga, which is devotion. You do prayers, you do going to a temple, you
Mm-hmm.
sing songs, you sing hymns, you read about mythology, stories about Krishna and other deities, or Jesus. And if you're more intellectually oriented, then you get jnana yoga, which is the knowledge, which is what we're doing now, studying the scriptures and so on.
Right.
Those are the three yogi aspects. When you get past the yogi, you become a sannyasi. A sannyasi, by doing karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, your desires tend to diminish and drop off. When the bulk of your desires are dropped off, you become a sannyasi. The desires for the worldly objects are less and they become minimal. That's when you learn to concentrate and put dhyana or single pointed meditation, and you become a jnani. A jnani is somebody who is more knowledgeable and self realized. So, renouncing all actions in me is what it said in verse 6, means renouncing the selfishness in an action for the sake of a higher cause in life. All the selfishness in your action to say, well, if I do this, my boss will pat me on the back, I'll get
Yeah.
a reward. Putting all that aside, you're saying, I'm doing this for my community, not for me. I don't want my name, I don't want fame, I don't want money, I don't want power. I just do it because I ought to do it for the community. You want to do it for your church, for your temple, for the country, the company that you work for, as long as it is something outside you. Renouncing your own me in that. And death bound means that we discussed this to some extent in the last episode, but death bound means everything in this world dies. When you're in summer, summer dies and autumn begins. And you say, I wish summer could go on forever. Well, only if you're in the Caribbean, I guess.
Right.
But a good book that you're reading, that you're enjoying, finishes at some point. A good movie finishes. Everything in life finishes except for the Atman or the Brahman. But unfortunately, what we're looking for is permanent happiness. And you cannot find permanent happiness in an impermanent world. This world, everything ends. So we're looking for permanent happiness
Right.
in the world, and yet nothing in the world is happy. So, for instance, you are looking at wanting $2 million. You say, you know what, if I only got $2 million, I'd be so happy. But the minute you start getting there, let's say you get 1 million, 1.5 million, as you don't even get your 2 million, but you're getting there, you start to say, well, I'm not that happy right now with this money. I
Right.
wish I could get 3 million, 5 million. Your goals go higher. So your goals shift, your mind shifts. Even if the world is listening to your demands, your mind shifts.
Right.
So recognize that if your mind stays the same, the world changes, right? So you say, I love this summer. God, I'm so happy. Who says this doctor on TV says I cannot find permanent happiness? Right now, I'm very happy
Yeah.
until summer ends.
Right.
Then your mind is still saying, I love the summer, but summer's ended. Now you say, oh, well, my mind is still the same, but the summer has ended. The book has ended. The movie's ended. Whatever was giving you happiness is ended. Now imagine that the world is the same,
Right.
but your mind is changing, or the world is changing. You have a beautiful wife. You say, I wish I could get married to her. If I could get married to her, my everything would change. I'd be happy. You
Right.
get married to her, and she starts to gain weight or starts to change in her attitude. She's nasty, not as nice a person. She starts to get older. Whatever it is, there's changes in him or her, the
Right.
spouse. And you say, I'm not happy. I was happy. I thought I'd get married to her, but she's not the same, or I'm not the same. So your mind changes, the outside world changes. Therefore, you cannot find permanent happiness in anything around you that is the world. You can only find happiness from what our uh, spiritual teachers teach us is when you decide that none of this matters to you, you're going to seek happiness elsewhere. And when
Right.
you start to focus on the Brahman, only then you start to recognize that true happiness starts to come to you when you don't seek it anymore.
Yeah, happiness almost seems to be the end of the end of search, the end of seeking.
When you when you want something, it becomes diminishing returns. When you get something,
Right.
you get money, you get ice cream, you get food, or you get beauty. There's never any end to how much you want. The exact opposite is true. When you start to push things away and you don't need them, you don't have them, is when you start to get more happy.
Mhm.
And of course, the scriptures say and the sages say, I want nothing. That's when I'm happiest. And
Yeah.
it brings us back to that episode with Alexander the Great, who sent his
Yes.
head of the army looking for a gymnosist, and who went to the forest and says, somebody's completely naked, and he says, I'll give you anything, come with me to Alexander. He says, I have everything already, I
Yes.
don't need anything, I'm happiest without anything. If you give me a bucket full of money, I'd be worried about somebody coming and stealing it from me. I'm happier without it. So
That's a fascinating revelation that your happiness comes at the end of the search when you're no longer searching for
that's
things
right.
to
That's
make
right.
you happy. Yes.
It's come true so many times in my own personal experience. I can tell you that. So, friends, thank you. We're done with chapter verses 5 through 7 of chapter 12, and we'll continue next time.